Here's a little thought about firing on all cylinders. Definitely when you've got fatigue, but in general, if your energies are being directed towards something that needs to be dealt with, so past trauma, retroactive trauma, too many issues to deal with at the moment because you can't set boundaries and therefore you are overdoing it, you're in survival, that takes your energy and means that you have to be very, very good at maintaining your energy so that you can stay firing on all cylinders. And it's a lovely expression because firing on all cylinders, obviously it's related to the car engine, and well, I'm guessing it is, and helps you kind of understand that let's say you've got 8 cylinders, excuse me, I'm just avoiding a puddle, and you need them all to be firing, and they all produce a percentage of the overall energy. If one of them doesn't work properly, if the seating's gone or something, kind of sound like I know what I'm talking about cars now, I don't, but if something goes wrong with the car and you can't fire on all cylinders, then you don't have the full power, the full velocity, the full speed, the full force, the horsepower. So you can't get traction, so you can't, so basically the whole thing doesn't work. Bianca, we're getting this bacon, don't you? So you have to think, well, what makes it possible to fire on all cylinders? And that's when we can look at the 8 areas of life that need balancing and addressing in order to be able to maintain that level of energy. And one of those main ones, of course, is the fuel we put in, but it's also how we maintain and look after the whole machine as an overall. Now, I'm very careful about referring to the body as a machine, because it isn't a machine as such. It is a system. It is an input, process, output system. And pretty much that's what it does in every sense, physically, mentally, emotionally, with all of our senses, input and process, and then that helps us. So when you see all these models from NLP talking about the models of the world and these pictures of the brain, really they're just explaining the input, process, output, and how we build and create the filters that we use. And there's a kind of a self-perpetuating system that then occurs, because if I see a certain thing and I make sense of it in a certain way, and that gives me a certain level of truth and understanding of something, I then apply that level of truth and understanding back out. I project that back out. So therefore, if I see something again that is similar, my filtration system matches it. So we've got an ongoing pattern match system in the brain, and actually in the whole of our system, not just the brain. So this pattern matching is the only way I can stay sane and process so many millions of bits of information. Otherwise, I would just go mad with all of that information. And for people with ADD and ADHD, one of the issues is with the reticular activating system, which is part of that filtering system. How do I prioritize what is important? Which information coming into me needs my attention? And if it's all equally important, and usually that's because we're in survival mode, we can do it. We have it when we're in creative mode, but when we're in creative mode, we're in flow. And when we're in flow, we don't try to apply any kind of survival or any mental thought technique to it. We don't need to, because we're in trust, and in trust we behave very differently. So being in flow, I guess you could say it's like being in trust, but as an animal, I'm more inclined to respond to things on a survival level. So really the reticular activating system helps us to filter, and it's the part of the brain that helps you. It's like a Google database search, really, and it helps you. Like if you've never seen yellow cars before, you don't really notice yellow cars, and then you buy a yellow car, and suddenly when you go out the next day, everyone's got one. Suddenly they're everywhere, and now that car has become relevant to you. It's entered your conscious awareness, or a different level of your subconscious, so that you now can notice those things. And that happens in general. If we feel we're not good enough, we filter out people telling us things that remind us of that, and we kind of flip them, or we delete them, or we take information and we generalize it into areas that we're not good enough. And it's not possible to really let the other stuff filter in when we're telling ourselves, when we have a bigger filter that is the opposite. And all of our issues really have conflicting parts of us, conflicting filters. So a part will put up a very powerful filter or set of filters and kind of polarize the reality of what's going on. And the reality is really just about possibility. It's not possible to see things differently. The reality doesn't match my understanding of reality that I have made sense of so far and I now project. And if it doesn't, then I'll delete it, or I'll try to twist it and distort it to fit it, to make it work. And I go about my life making sense of the world in that way. Now that's okay in order to process information. It's not helpful when those filters begin to close us down and make us feel more and more and more separate. And as separation is an illusion, we get confused between what is a boundary and a separation. Boundaries occur by the nature of having a force field. A force field extends in its mass, if you like, or in its energy in a certain amplitude, and there's a kind of edge of that, and the edges are, depending on how the energy falls off, are permeable or semi-permeable. But if I don't know where my edges are, it's very hard to set boundaries. And if I feel I have a very brittle edge and I'm very separated, then I'm really afraid of being separated from others, or them encroaching upon me. I can't hold my integrity, my boundary integrities and my field integrity. So although we use these words in daily life, actually they're kind of science-based. I don't want to go off into science right now because that doesn't necessarily prove anything anyway. But the language is much deeper, the language of integrity and boundaries. Knowing where to hold appropriate, safe and appropriate boundaries, so that you can still maintain your sense of self. And there's lots in the spiritual world about losing the self, and the self doesn't exist. Yeah, it does. It doesn't exist in separation. That's the point. That's the bit where people get completely confused. And there's a movement a while ago about forgetting the self and pushing people to have these fast breakthroughs, all these claims about the monks have been taking too long, we can help you do it in a few simple questions. Well, you have to be really careful about breaking someone's sense of self, because unless they've got a profound and stable sense of self, then they have to build the sense of self to be able to realize that self is not separate. So we do have one, we have to have one, otherwise we wouldn't know the boundaries of where I am and you are, and what is good for me and right for me and what is not, and what is my unique perspective of consciousness. We're all part of consciousness. We are all the full holographic... Hello, darling. I'm getting hassled by a little dog. We are the full manifestation of consciousness. Hello. But we are manifesting this unique perspective, and that unique perspective is what you could call you. Nobody has that. Nobody will ever have that. Only you. And only me will be me. Now, that doesn't make me separate, doesn't make me better. It just makes me, like everybody, unique. And we're all unique. So, knowing where we've made sense of that, knowing what's happened that we can work on. Just watching my dog not fall off the bench. Oh, fall off the bench. Well done. Good girl. Hello, you silly girl. Careful. You're trying to tell me to come on now. Is it time to go back? I want to go back to Daddy now. So, every entity, every living thing, and actually everything that is living and conscious but doesn't have conscious awareness because it doesn't have the senses to have conscious awareness. Sentient beings have senses and they can sense emotion. But just because something is not living doesn't mean, or not sentient doesn't mean it's not living. Everything is part of consciousness. But if we didn't have edges and boundaries, then there would not be the opportunity for these experiences. If I don't realize I'm separate from Bianca, then I won't have an interaction, careful, with Bianca and with her brother. And the fact that they get jealous of each other is to do with the stuff that they learnt actually from their parents and in utero, and then from their very, very early experiences of getting food and being in a very big litter, and they began to give meaning to things that happened. So Bianca learnt that she had to sit back and make sense of things and never quite got in there and got what she wanted. Now she pinches Nero's sweets, for example, and she hides them, or hides hers and pinches his, but he's okay, he doesn't really care. But he'll grab at things when she's not around. So they're learning how to deal with what's going on in their field, information that they're now filtering. They have their own truths and sense of truth. Oh, I'm coming now. So boundaries give us our ability to interact.